So good morning, everyone. As Dr. Jackson said, my name is Madeleine Styskal. I'm a composer, writer, and researcher from Houston, Texas. I'm obtaining my master's in composition at the University of Texas at Austin, at the Butler School of Music. And I've been an expat to various Russian cities where I've studied language and culture, conducted ethnographical research, and taught English. And then last academic year, I studied on a stagirovka with Rodina at the Moscow Conservatory. However, before I ever set foot in Russia, I had encountered the stereotypical Russian love for the motherland, as many Americans have. For instance, in books, as a child, I became acquainted, in the book Dancing at the Odinochka, I became acquainted with a story of a girl and her coming of age in Russian Alaska at the threshold of the 1867 Alaskan Purchase. It was this scene that initially intrigued me and gave me my first insight into Russian culture and Russian identity. Then it was time for the music. Lev and Dmitry would play their instruments, and Nikolai would sing sad, throbbing songs from the Ukraine that he had learned from his Russian father. Then Nikolai sang his sad songs, which sounded like someone crying. Some of his songs started out very slowly and got faster and faster until Lev had to jump up and dance again. Some of his songs made old man Kazevnikov cry. "Ah, Mother Russia," he sighed, though Irina knew that he had never been to Russia. Back in the States currently, I continue to wonder why. What's the reason for cultivating a nostalgia strong enough to last through generations? And what can come of building an identity on music from a past place and time? Is there something utopian about this collective musical dreaming? This is the purpose of my research, to explain whether nostalgia, musical nostalgia, is useful, and if so, how? I have taken a multidisciplinary approach to this research question by tying together theories from utopian studies and psychological studies. I have attempted to explain why nostalgia is useful, to draw us out of ourselves, to create a community via collective dreaming and training of desire. Concurrently, drawing on research from Soviet studies in musicology, I examine how it's useful, surveying the collective dreaming played out at a Russian-American scout camp and campfire sing-alongs from an eclectic songbook. The history of the songbook repertoire explains what the object of this Russian nostalgia is and what it has to offer Russian-speaking American campers. And, I hope you'll agree, what musical nostalgia could offer each of us. In the brief scene from Dancing at the Odinochka is an anecdote of a specific brand of Russian nostalgia, a music-evoked emotion, so strong that it supersedes place of birth data on passports and causes foreign-born ethnic Russians to call the Russian Empire home. This anecdote is not exclusive to this piece of children's fiction. Richard Taruskin defines Russia abroad via Mark Rafe as the Russian-speaking population that fled the surge of the Red Army or escaped the Bolshevik and subsequent Soviet regime. Per his description, this society's habitually tight bonding through music is indicative of a people unwilling to, quote, unpack their suitcases, unquote, and assimilate in their land of exile, instead awaiting the day of return to the motherland. By the time Soviet power was consolidated around 1927-1930, Russia abroad had also established itself as an insular and heterogeneous society, one whose main theater of operations, its main existential validator, lay in cultural rather than political life. Russian nostalgia comes in a peculiar flavor, since the land which Russian-speaking emigres called home has traded powers and redrafted borders several times over the course of the 20th century. For the Russian exile, nostalgia as a longing for the homeland seeks that which has been lost, both in time and space. For Svetlana Boym, whose book, The Future of Nostalgia, is outstanding in the Soviet nostalgia literature, the Russian brand of the emotion has followed the historical tendency for nostalgia to surge after revolutions. However, Russian nostalgia, quote, is not always for the ancient regime, stable superpower, or the fallen empire. but also for the unrealized dreams of the past and visions of the future that became obsolete, unquote. Yet in music, in this sense a utopian mechanism, time and space can be transversed, unearthing memories and evoking emotions at the drop of a needle on record. Over 100 years after the October Revolution, with both the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union fading into the past, Russian nostalgia seemingly points to a utopia in the Morian sense, a nowhere that exists in no time. But what if there still were a place where music could reconstruct the community regularly, could build out the utopia of nostalgia in practice? There is such a place in the Adirondacks, a microcosm of the Russia abroad community in America. Here, the organization of young Russian scouts, or Organizatsiya Rossiyskih Yulik Razvedchikov, runs an annual youth summer camp and offers children of the age of information allegiance to Mother Russia via music and more. Musical nostalgia cannot be inborn for them, but as for old man Kazetnikov, it can be taught. I will make the case that this process of teaching Russianness to ORUR scouts, according to the Russia Abroad principle, is at its root a utopian project. That passing on nostalgia secondhand via diversified Russian music is a constructive phenomenon illustrative of utopian scholar Ruth Levitas' process-based utopia. The ephemerality of the youth summer camp experience in general offers fertile ground for cultivating or creating a culture from scratch, as counselors try to create a sense of belongingness through traditions repeated annually. Camps take on a mythical utopian function, both nowhere and home at once, realizing in some capacity a utopian vision, or, as Ruth Levitas paraphrases Miguel Abençour, embodying in the forms of fantasy alternative values sketched in an alternative way of life. An international organization operating on American soil since 1945, the Organization of Young Russian Scouts, or ORUR henceforth, has the mission of teaching Russian heritage and Christian morals to its scouts all year long. At ORUR summer camps, this enculturation is condensed and accelerated, enacted in games, dance, master classes, and perhaps most significantly, in song. Participation in music making enjoys remarkable longevity in the memory of participants, serving for some as the most Russian activity ORUR offers. Natalie Zelinsky, an ethnomusicologist conducting fieldwork at the ORUR Adirondack campus in 2008, interviewed a 25-year-old alumna of the camp and received the following appraisal of the campers' experience attending ORUR in New York in the 1990s. Quote, "I think back to camp, for instance, and about really getting into the songs we sang around the campfire. And it's something that probably gave me a deeper connection to the big picture, to what we were trying to do, to preserve something. More than probably anything else, the biggest thing that we did that was specifically Russian or that fostered a connection to Russia was sitting around the campfire and singing Russian songs." Zelinsky emphasizes, quote, "The direct experience of singing songs around a campfire serves as the primary impetus for informing this interviewee with abstract concepts of belonging, cultural preservation, and diasporic mission," end quote. According to Boyne's theories of nostalgia and its place in the exile's experience, this bonding over campfire songs should not be underestimated, but rather may be understood as collective dreaming and reconstruction of the homelands. Quote, "It is the promise to rebuild the ideal home that lies at the core of many powerful ideologies of today, tempting us to relinquish critical thinking for emotional bonding. The sentiment itself, the mourning of displacement and temporal irreversibility, is at the very core of the modern condition," unquote. While children of immigrants may not have the same memories that continue to haunt their parents or predecessors, the camp songbook in practice mirrors Ernst Bloch's educated hope in theory. According to Levitas, quote, "The distinction between abstract and concrete utopia, what Bloch called doctospace, or educated hope, has to be understood as process rather than classification. This delivers a further understanding of the function of utopia, or of the imaginary reconstruction of society as method, the education of desire," unquote. For adolescents in a search of a sense of belongingness and a personal encounter with their ethnic heritage, or for those whose parents desire the same for the children, music making represents an encounter with Russian culture made definite, desirable, and accessible, as well as the offer to accept it as one's own through participation. That this music is powerfully imbued with nostalgia for the adults who compiled the songbook and who signed up their children for the camp should not be discounted either. The door to participating in nostalgia for a bygone homeland is open. Desire can be taught. In practice, however, the question of what constitutes appropriately Russian music is much more complicated. The ORUR songbook is at first glance fraught with political contradictions, sampling from multiple centuries of Russia's sung traditions. Zelensky notes that the great historical and cultural disparity present at one sing-along alone included Piesnya Alexeyevskого polka, Molis Kunak, Ech Dorogi, and Russian Orthodox prayers. This dizzying diversity of genres from different political and historical contexts, united under the aegis of an anti-communist Russia abroad, seems a contradiction to the camp's origin in mission, or at best an oversight. As Zelensky remarks, the choice of repertoire, specifically of Soviet wartime songs, seems even more curious when considering the political context out of which ORUR emerged, namely that of the anti-communist first-wave Russian diaspora, whose members fled their homeland in response to the Bolshevik Revolution and subsequent civil war, unquote. Yet, the tension in such diversity serves a purpose. For Foucault's definition of heterotopia as actually existing utopia, contradictions are part and parcel of the project, and in fact are necessary, serving to jolt the visitor out of himself. In Unraveling Foucault's Different Spaces, Peter Johnson describes real-life venues which unsettle, just as campers may experience culture shock upon encountering modes of being Russian that conflict with the particular traditions they know from home. Quote, "The conception is not tied to a space that promotes any promise, any hope, or any primary form of resistance or liberation. Heterotopias are fundamentally disturbing places. Children's games, holidays, festivals, brothels, prisons, asylums, cemeteries, and ships alter to different degrees what may be described as everyday existence. Heterotopias draw us out of ourselves in peculiar ways. They display and inaugurate a difference and challenge the space in which we may feel at home. These emplacements exist out of step and meddle with our sense of interiority," end quote. According to Baudrillard's essay on the European conception of America, for the European exile to the US, there is a tendency to turn inward. Quote, For the European, even today, America represents something akin to exile, a fantasy of emigration, and therefore a form of interiorization of his or her own culture," unquote. I will remark it is a bit ironic that American soil and society, already considered by Baudrillard as utopia achieved, is the site of this Russian utopia. For the Russian-American camper, however many generations removed from their family's immigration, the heterotopia of the camp may estrange them momentarily from the American beat, from a sense of home in America, by drawing them out of themselves, albeit not always an easy task to accomplish with adolescence. Ultimately, the conglomeration of contradictory styles presents no issue for Zelensky's analysis either, since it allows a heterogeneous group of campers access to a whole gamut of repertoire, the freedom to play with the options available, and the ability to select the cultural soundtrack which personally resonates most. It is this element of play which threads through Zelensky's fieldwork. Quote, "This musical blending itself constitutes igra, for its patchwork of genres, linguistic codes, cultural references, and historical lineages point to a myriad of ways of performing Russianness, difference, and being in diaspora," unquote. The camp offers participants from diverse backgrounds both a unifying utopia founded in nostalgia and, upon closer examination, a heterotopia that broadens their understanding of the many different modes of Russianness. If this seems to you that these models are at odds with each other, that there's a contradiction in calling the camp both a utopia and a heterotopia, let's discuss this in the Q&A session. The songs themselves bear witness to multi-layered processes of re-encoding, which may help to reconcile the seeming contradictions of their origins. In fact, at one of the most meaningful of camp rituals, these musical traditions manage to intersect in the flag-raising song, a programming choice which bears a hefty load of cultural and historical significance. As Zelensky notes, during the daily flag-raising and lowering ceremonies, participants sing Kol Slavin Nash Gospod v Sioni, an 18th century spiritual piece composed by Dmitry Bortniansky in 1794, describing the ubiquity of God's presence on earth and adopted as a classic hymn within the diaspora. I do have this video not only in the presentation, also on my thumb drive, so if we have time to listen, we can do that a little bit later. Singing sacred music outside the context of the liturgy or without the confines of the church building is itself a tradition dating back to the 17th century Russian courts of Tsars Alexei and Fyodor, thus fitting comfortably within the camp's cultural historical self-fashion. The song's composer, too, is of special significance. According to Daniel Morrison and Barry Brinisov, Dmitry Bortniansky predated Mikhail Glinka as the true father of Russian music in his work as composer and capellmeister at the St. Petersburg Imperial Chapel Choir, starting in 1796. Bortniansky's Kol Slavin enjoyed venerated status in Russian society long before the revolution as the truest spiritual anthem of Russia. It features a largely stepwise diatonic melody, which according to Alexander Aleyev bears resemblance to the codified Orthodox Znameni chant tradition and belay its older foundations. The cultural resonance of Kol Slavin only accumulated over time, gaining popularity in all social strata, and by the mid-19th century, marking the time across the country. Quote, the anthem's melody rang out from countless pocket watches, table clocks, and grandfather clocks, and since 1856, right up until October 1917, also sounded from the 37 bells of the Spasskaya Tower of the Moscow Kremlin as a rule every day at noon, unquote. Despite its religious origins, the melody took on new life in Soviet popular song, adapted in Dmitry Shostakovich's setting of Yevgeny Dolmatovsky's Rodina Slishit, Rodina Znayet. This is a picture by the artist Vasyl Loshkin, which I think gives a sinister second meaning or a second interpretation to those words. It was this rendition which became the unofficial hymn of Soviet cosmonauts when Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, whistled and sang the song at blastoff and from orbit. As a song with strong roots in the pre-revolutionary Russian Empire, marked by the fingerprints of both Bortniansky and Shostakovich alike, as a hymn for Soviet cosmonauts and exiles, Kol Slavin is a microcosm of all the camp stands for, managing to unite diverse Russian musical traditions under a common umbrella. It's true that time and place are confused for the campers. They have no foot in the Russian Empire. Here they are a continent and a century away from the literal reality of Kol Slavin, and potentially as far diverse temporally and spatially from the rest of the songbook repertoire. Yet campers' testimonies gathered by Zelensky reveal the efficacy of passing down nostalgia by teaching it in song. As Zelensky notes, music associated with ORUR also presents a space in which personal memories are conflated with semblances of a collective past. This past is informed by references to various events in Russian history frequently found in ORUR repertoire, end quote. This conflation of personal and collective memory leaves a lasting impression on camp alumni, a testament to the existence of secondhand nostalgia. Whether or not the young participants are cognizant at the time, nostalgia for the motherland modulates into a no less visceral nostalgia for camp. Thus, the campers are heirs to a previous generation's utopia. Is there something particularly nostalgia-invoking, though, about Russian song repertoire? Or is the tendency to wax nostalgic a learned behavior in Russian emigre circles? For Boehm, researching the origins of the nostalgia in the Romantic movement, sound alone functions as symbols capable of swift sensory connection with memory and a sense of home. Presenting the example of Jean-Jacques Rousseau's discussion of the clanking cowbells, she notes the rustic sounds that excite in the Swiss the joys of life and youth, and a bitter sorrow for having lost him. The music in this case does not act precisely as music, but as a memorative sign. The music of home, whether a rustic cantilena or a pop song, is the permanent accompaniment of nostalgia. Its ineffable charm that makes the nostalgic teary-eyed and tongue-tied, and often clouds critical reflection on the subject, unquote. According to the findings in the first study on music-evoked nostalgia, several spectra regulate the possibility that a given song will provoke for a given listener a nostalgic episode. A combination of personal knowledge of the song and its autobiographical relevance to the listener, as well as the person's temperament, all determine the ideal conditions for music-evoked nostalgia. While new campers may have little to no autobiographical connection to the ORUR songbook repertoire at the beginning of summer, by the end of camp, the traditions should have been given significant opportunity, sufficient to take root. There may be no controlling for neuroticism or affectivity in the face of potentially nostalgia-causing songs, but by creating a pleasant camp experience, counselors can optimize positive memories in association with Russian songs of any political or historical context. Listening and responding emotionally, too, is a behavior which the camp helps to pass on. While the Russian Empire, which Old Man Kazivnikov knew, cannot be reconstructed, this forward-pointing and not backward-looking nostalgia still benefits the children of the Russia abroad community by producing a sense of brotherhood with the rest of the Russian diaspora and security in one's ethnic identity. There may be nothing particularly genetic about the Russian response to Russian sensory symbols such as song, but that there is a definite penchant for collectively experiencing toska via music in Russian culture is evident in the commemorative World War II era repertoire, which resurfaces every year around May 9th, the anniversary of Victory Day. A celebration with tears in your eyes, as the saying goes. In Russian culture, this is a poignant element of behavior for musicians and audience members alike. In the psychological article Back to the Future, Chung et al. State that there is a positive benefit to engaging in the mixed or negative emotions folded into nostalgia, which maximizes future well-being. The study's results offer evidence that nostalgia's worth may not be in its backward glance into a more pleasant past, but may offer assistance and illumination extended into the future. Quote, "The current research established that nostalgia promotes optimism. This pattern held regardless of the way in which nostalgia was induced, for women and men, across age groups and in 3 cultures, American, English, and Dutch. The optimistic flame ignited by nostalgia is fueled by increases in self-esteem, which is founded on social connectedness. Nostalgia is not just an old sepia-toned photo locked in a box. Its power is far-reaching and can brighten up the path ahead," unquote. Thus, waxing nostalgic need not be merely a self-indulgent endeavor, but when performed and consumed in community can be constructive, facilitating collective dreaming, or, per Larisa's definition, a positive utopian process. After all, her definition of utopia, quote, "equally allows and ultimately encourages the closing words of the novel News from Nowhere. If others can see as I have seen it, then it may be called a vision rather than a dream," end quote. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Any questions you have?
Oh, you wanted to play examples to us.
Yes, if I
Can we listen,
an example
please?
of Cold Slav, and let's see if I can exit out of this. A little blurry. Oh, it's very quiet. It's only playing for me on the laptop. It's not connected to the sound system. Or is it? phrase just repeats. This song also, I don't think it particularly sounds specifically like Znamení chant myself, but it has caught on also in Germany and England, and it also has become, I believe, the hymn for the Freemasons. So it's really spread around the world and is no longer just associated with Russia, but it has so much significance for the Russian community in Russia and abroad that I thought it was significant that the camp chose to use this as their flag ceremony song.
This melody by Bartnyansky spread into...
To England, it's used, Charles Wesley wrote hymn text to it, so it's even found in American hymnals, like in the Methodist
That
Church.
is so unusual from that repertoire that something has... Oh my God.
He's not always credited, I don't believe. The tune is known as St. Petersburg without crediting Bartnyansky, particularly in hymn collections.
Do you know how it spread?
No,
By
I'm
what
not sure.
means? Huh. And no more songs you're gonna play for
We can play the rest of it if you'd like, but it just repeats.
Yes, yes.
It's strophic. All right, thank you so much for your attention. If you have no more questions, I'll yield the floor.
I have no question, but just thanks for saying.